Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is the Current Podcast.
There's thousands of healthy pink salmon in this river right in front of me, right where it connects to the ocean. And they're all just swimming around, starting their trip up the river to spawn.
Ethan Colpitts is on a beach on Moresby Island on Haida Gwaii. You can see the fish shimmering below the surface, and there are fins sticking out of the water too, and the fish are jumping.
Yeah, it's a hell of a sight. Never seen anything quite like it.
He pulls out his fishing rod and casts into the river.
Got a bunch coming in now.
It doesn't take long to catch one. Isn't there a saying, something about fish in a barrel?
Oh, there's one. Try to tire him out a little bit and get him into the net.
The hook pops out of the fish's mouth just as he's bringing it to shore.
That makes it easy.
Makes it easy because he was going to throw it back anyway.
Won't forget this ever. Seeing all these salmon and the black bears and everything about this place is super cool. Truly magical.
I have been in Haida Gwaii, a group of islands off the north coast of British Columbia, for less than an hour. And already that word is being used, magic. So many people who live here or have visited here say the same thing. And you see that magic as soon as you arrive. The fog lingering over the small islands, the 300-year-old cedar and spruce trees, the bald eagles gliding overhead. I'm here on Haida Gwaii to talk to people about an historic land agreement. Earlier this year, the BC government officially recognized the Haida Nation's Aboriginal title over the islands of Haida Gwaii. It's a right that the Haida say they never gave up. Governments are just finally coming around to acknowledging it. Later, I'll speak with the president of the Haida Nation to get details of the agreement. But first, a look back at that fight to protect the land of Haida Gwaii. This is a campaign that has been going on for decades, a campaign that's mostly been waged in the woods. And that is where we start today, in an old-growth forest just outside of Masset, Haida Gwaii. I'm Matt Galloway, and you're listening to The Current.
Up to just park here and walk up.
Okay. Let's go for a hike. Just off the highway is a gravel road. It leads straight up a hill to a cell phone tower and a gravel pit.
Hearing me huffing and puffing.
It is a steep hill. The road is relatively new, but the woods surrounding us have been used by generations of Haida.
How far up are you? Not very far.
We'll get there when we get there. My guide is Jalin Edenshaw. He and his daughter, Hannah, are taking us to look for an ancient canoe deep in the forest.
What's special about it is when, like, Guj and them were first, trying to get areas protected. This canoe was one of the first spots where they were able to stop the logging.
Okay.
You'll see it's sort of logged around it. But
Guj is Gujau, Jalin's dad, an elder and hereditary chief who's one of the people that's been working to protect this land for decades. When Guj found the canoe, he is able to get an injunction to stop the logging.
This isn't it, is it?
I think this is a bit too high.
Okay.
And let's be clear, finding it isn't easy.
The road goes in and then it splits into two.
I remember.
Even Jalin missed the trail off the main road the first time. We circle back, and it's Hannah who leads the way.
Is this it?
Yep.
The trail in the woods starts nicely enough, but it does not take long before we are quite literally bushwhacking. Pushing through thick shrubs, climbing over fallen trees covered in moss.
You okay back there, Matt?
Yes, I am, thank you. Slight just detour into the woods. I can report from some experience that falling isn't so bad because it's into a thick bed of moss.
How old would these trees be?
Probably 300-400 years here. Some of the bigger ones, maybe 500.
The air is cooler, and the sunshine filters through the giant cedars like splinters.
You can see on this side here, everything's been logged on this side. And then over here, it's old growth forest. And that all was protected because of the canoe we're going to go see.
There's a clearing, and Jalin stops next to what looks like a tree that has fallen in the woods. It's on a 45-degree angle, covered in moss.
So here's the canoe right here. You can see the stump there where it was cut. This is where it fell. And then there's the front of it. You can see sort of the shape of it started there. And then once that was done, they could steam it and probably get it open another foot or so.
And this would be from how long ago?
If I had to guess, I'd say the 1860s, and that's when the smallpox hit, and most of the canoes come from that time.
You were saying as we were coming in that, this area was slated to be completely logged?
In those days, if they saw a canoe like this, they'd either just move it off site or they'd fall the trees away and then just leave it. But then once it's open, it would, degrade pretty quick. So Gujau and Captain Golden and the leadership from that day, when they found this canoe, they actually got an injunction against the logging companies and were able to stop it. And that injunction's never been overturned. This was sort of one of the first cases where they were able to protect an area because of our ancient sites here. The title agreement is, it's an amazing step forward, but, the leadership over the years, it's already law, BC law, to protect these areas, and that's based on the work that we did to make that happen. But yeah, going forward, we make the rules and make sure that people abide by them.
From your perspective, it's personally, but also for the Haida, why is it important to know about these sites? Things are going to be different now in the new landscape of government recognizing Haida title, but up until now, we've had to use our culture and things like this old canoe and the monumental cedar and the medicinal plants to protect these areas. And the argument being that we need these things to exist as a people. And it's true, right? This, our culture, who we are, comes from Haida Gwaii, from the land. So this is exactly who we are right here. We stand for a minute, taking in the silence of the forest, and try to imagine what it would have taken more than a century ago to fell this tree, carve it into a canoe, and then carry it out through the forest and down to the water.
In our Haida stories, it was the supernaturals that showed us how to make the canoe. And when they were doing it, the one guy would go up into the bush, he would hear the supernatural working on it all night, and then go up and look, and it would be made in different stages. And that's how we relearned to make it, is by coming up into the bush and seeing these canoes in different stages. And so that's what my dad told me, is that's how they learned. It all ties together.
There's so much to learn from being here. Just hearing that story, I was thinking about how if Guj wasn't out here and exploring in the bush and found this, then none of this would be here for him to take you into, or you to take me into. And just as long as we're on the land, making use of it, it'll be there for us. I feel really lucky.
How's our time?
Just about 4, 10 to 4, 5 to 4.
Guj, I got a text from Guj saying on his way, so he's probably another hour.
Okay. Gujau is on his way from Skidegate to meet us at Jalan's carving shed, so we can talk to 3 generations of this family all at once.
How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Holy smoke, they sent the real thing.
Matt.
Gujau.
Nice to meet you. Gujau's seated next to a massive piece of cedar. Animals and faces are taking shape. He commissioned his sons to carve this totem pole. The raising ceremony is in October.
Just let them carve while you're talking.
Jalan still has lots of work to do, so he immediately slides underneath the pole and continues the work of carving out the face of one of 3 watchmen.
Can just carve and talk to.
I start by asking Gujau about his activism in the past and how that relates to the land title agreement that's just been signed.
There's no sense having rights to fish if there's no fish, or right to a culture if there's no cedar and no land to relate to. And so they both work together.
And so that designation from the government, what does that mean to you, the fact that the government has said the Haida have title?
No, that is not a designation, that's a recognition. The title doesn't come from them. It doesn't come from the crown, it doesn't come from the court. It comes from our ancestry. They're recognizing inherent title.
What does that mean?
What we have right now is we have a transition period, but basically the land is going back into the hands of the people who love it the most. After 100 years of abuse of the forest, of the salmon, halibut, everything that they've managed has been treated with disdain.
Did you ever imagine that you would get to this moment? mean, there's been court battles that are still continuing, but that the adversarial kind of fight might be won.
Oh, I knew we'd win.
You knew you'd win.
Yeah. We did a lot of things with other governments. We won a lot of court cases. We won a lot of stands. We did a lot of things that led to this moment, but it, wasn't automatic. It wasn't going to come freely. But in the end, really there was not much other choice.
What do you mean there wasn't much other choice?
They couldn't beat us. I think the feeling around the island is, there's a certain edge off. There's still a lot of things to do. For instance, all around the world, similar things are happening. Economies are built by spoiling the earth. Like we have tide rising here, we have climate changing, the land's drying out. And so it's a global fight. It's not just here, there's no sitting back and saying, okay, we're okay, and trying to enjoy being the last one standing or something. It's a fight that involves everybody. It should be. And the fight is against systems that have developed that are just spoiling the earth.
When you think about it, what is your vision for what Haida Gwaii could be now that part of the fight is over?
Well, in vision, I think we got to recognize that the most valuable thing we have here is nature. And from the nature here, that's where we get our culture. And so the future has got to allow for the next generations to enjoy nature and culture.
Does it make you, when you hear that next generation that's here, that's picking up in some ways what you've been doing, how does that make you feel?
Well, it's good. That's the way it's supposed to be. If these guys didn't know how to fish and they didn't know how to carve and they didn't know how to sing, they don't have to be able to be good at singing. But if they, then my generation would have failed them.
I'm standing in front of, you're sitting in front of this pole that's being carved. Well, what does this mean that this is happening for you?
My job here is to come and make sure they're not making any major mistakes or anything. Gentle criticism. But, it's going to be a nice pole. It'll be a nice event. And the event is a celebration of culture. That's when the masks and things come out. That's when people are singing and putting on all their best stuff that their families have made for them or they made for themselves. And that is the key to keeping a culture going.
I want to talk to your son, who's on the floor in the midst of this carving. In speaking with your dad about what the title recognition has meant to him and to the community, as somebody who grew up watching his work, what was that like?
Yeah, I remember as a little kid, watching Googe editing papers and changing Queen Charlotte Island, crossing it out and writing Haida Gwaii. And then 10 or so years ago, having Haida Gwaii again recognized, and we gave back the name Queen Charlotte to the government.
Because of his work? Because
of his work and other leaders. Yeah. There's been a lot, and I've been lucky to sort of grow up around some of those leaders, just hanging out in the meetings or mostly just waiting outside as he's in a meeting. But, it's a unique experience to sort of see that.
Tell us what you're carving. What is this that we're in front of?
Well, me and my brother Gwaii are carving a pole for our dad, Gujao, and it's just about done. We're closing in on it.
That's no small amount of pressure. I mean, it's a special client to be working for.
Yeah, and he was our first teacher in the art, and he's a carver himself, so he has a lot of input, which can be tricky sometimes.
You're being diplomatic because he's sitting right there.
You
took us out into the bush to see a canoe that had been left there, and you took us out with your daughter, Hannah. What do you see in terms of that potential of the next generation? This feels like a special time.
It is a real special time, and it's a time when the energy that has been going to fighting a lot of these things over the last, 50 years, 100 years, can turn to creating and building on our people's strength. And, I think that's what my parents' generation will leave, to their grandchildren. It's a time where they can put that same energy into sort of strengthening our culture.
Do you see that now in Hannah?
Oh yeah, she's been fighting since she was quite young, and she's definitely not shy to get involved in those battles. Interestingly, she's definitely been focused sort of outside the Haida fight a little bit, but is involved with climate change battles and stuff, and and I think that's something that we all got to be concerned with. So,
Hannah, knowing what you know about the fights that your grandfather was involved in and the moment that the Haida are in now, how do you see the work that he did?
I see the work that Gouge did and the work that leaders of sort of his generation did to bring us to this point where we are today as like some of the most important, influential thing in like my upbringing and how I was able to be raised, how my siblings and people in my generation were able to be raised. So yeah, I see that work as just integral into shaping this island as it is today and as I've come to live in it.
How do you think it shaped you?
My dad and Gujau, they always say like that this island doesn't belong to us. It's like we belong to this island. My mom, she's a Haida language professor. She's finishing getting her PhD, and my dad's a carver, so it's like practicing the culture has always been like on the forefront of my parents' minds, and so my mind growing up. My dad's like my whole life really encouraged me to learn Haida stories. When I was little, he would take me to elders' houses and he would tape record them as they told him stories. And
she'd hide under the table and eat the sugar out of the...
But I would listen too. I would do both.
You're talented.
Yeah, I think those stories are some of like the most like interesting and most worthwhile things I've ever heard. I go to potlatches, I see people dancing, and people dedicated so much of their lives to retaining, learning, passing on that knowledge. It just feels like not necessarily like an obligation, but like a privilege is like to pass that forward.
Your dad said something interesting in that, I mean, now that energy from the fight doesn't need to be directed towards the fight, it can be directed towards something else. And Gujau talked about that as well, that it can be sent towards something building, and that's the next phase of it. What do you see as your vision for this place?
That's a really good question. I think growing up, the way I sort of connected people like practicing our culture to a fight, because it's something Canada was trying to prevent us being on our land, us practicing our culture. I'm really excited for like my generation and future generations, for that not to be a fight, for that just to be like living.
What do you think your role is in this? I mean, you're now going to school at UBC. Are you going to come back here?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to come back here. I think there's a lot of hope and a lot of excitement. I'm not really sure what it's going to look like, but I want to be around to kind of witness a really historic moment.
Gujau, you must be proud of her. When you hear that, I mean, what goes through your mind?
Well, you look at Anna's generation, seeing, the climate issues for one thing, like it's nothing certain anymore, and to provide any degree of certainty is going to be helpful. And, hopefully we'll set an example that will start to resonate across the country and around the world, that protecting land and looking after the earth is a good thing to do. I mean, it's nice to see it healing and to work with it. and to build it back up and to take this win and enjoy the moment. But we don't expect that that's the end of our fight with big oil or all these things that we've had to deal with already. We got to deal with it as it comes. And again, not just me or my family, but all the families here, the other families who live on this island that worked with us to protect land. They've, talk about the ones who aren't Haida, they've stood with us because as they're living here, they come to rely on the land. A lot of them have relatives buried here now, and it starts to become more a part of them, and they feel some obligation to look after it. Really, in my lifetime, from having no influence to, having almost full responsibility for what's going to occur next. And so that is, a tough position, but a good position to be in.
It's really great to talk to you. A pleasure and an honor to meet you here, especially while this work is going on with these three generations kind of together. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming all the way out here to do this.
You also were really good in doing an interview while you're carving away. It's multitasking.
I hope you didn't wreck it while you're...
I was going to say, blame me, blame the CBC for that. Gujau is a Haida hereditary chief and negotiator. Jalen Edenshaw is a carver. Hannah Edenshaw is a UBC student and climate change activist. I spoke with all of them on Masset, on Haida Gwaii, a group of islands on the northern coast of British Columbia. In April, the Haida Nation signed an historic land title agreement with the BC government, recognizing Haida title to that land. My next guest knows well what it took to come to a deal.
Good morning. I'm Haida Gwaii. My Haida name, Jason Elsop, the elected president of the Haida Nation. And we are sitting in front of the Haida Heritage Center and Haida Gwaii Museum at Galloway, also known as Sea Lion Town, or Second Beach, just outside of Skidegate, Haida Gwaii.
One of the things that people have been paying attention to, certainly in the last little bit, but this is a long journey to get to this point, is this agreement around title. Tell me about it and what it means to you, and what it means to this place, but also the people who are here.
The Haida Title Lands Agreement between the Haida Nation and British Columbia ultimately means an act of yakudang or respect by the province to, finally recognize Haida title, Haida ownership, collective ownership of all the islands. And it creates the space to then look at designing a future for Haida Gwaii that recognizes this inherent title that pre-existed the Crown, existed today, will exist in the future. And it moves us from an adversarial position to actually be able to properly collaborate and cooperate with the people of the islands who've come to settle and live here in the Haida Nation, in the province and Canada, to create a foundation now that is based on our Haida history, our culture, our values, that is undisputed and not in that arena of conflict.
Why does the language around this matter? I mean, part of this is about, this has been referred to as giving title to the Haida Nation, but you talked about recognizing title.
Yeah, the language is very important. The province hasn't given us anything with this agreement. In fact, they're recognizing what existed, again, before the Crown tried to come and assert themselves here. They're recognizing Haida Aboriginal title within the constructs of the Canadian Constitution, but it also does in our agreement, acknowledge and reference inherent Haida title, which is our responsibility we've inherited from our ancestors. Now that title is recognized, we can all begin looking at the different jurisdictions that exist and how do we try to reconcile these things and bring them together or figure out, what the best path for the future is, led by the people who live here, the Haida people, and our friends and neighbors who we share the islands with.
There's the phrase that has been used over the last several years is this phrase, land back. Do you see this as an example of that?
In some way, I think if we're using the language to say, well, they're not giving us anything, we already had the land. I think what it does is it, again, moves us from a place of conflict where when the Haida Nation has to stand up and uphold our values, which essentially, our laws, and they're in conflict with provincial laws, that triggers a space where then under provincial law, you end up in the courts, you end up with injunctions and RCMP, you end up down that path. And by recognizing title, it opens up that space for us to work through those areas of jurisdictional conflict or different values. And with the Haida way of being as the foundation and what will lead the way.
So what is that going to mean, the Haida way of being? How is that, you talk about specifics, how is that going to change life here?
Our focus in the agreement has been on the land. Obviously, it's to recognize title to all the land. And what that means is creating a future that isn't two conflicting laws, but, one clear path forward, and one that is based on Haida ways of being, Haida values, which means that we recognize the interconnection of everything and look at it, I believe, more holistically. What our experience has been under colonization and provincial laws, you kind of end up with, a single-minded focus at times, which is centered around generating revenues and profits for companies and royalties for government that, hasn't invested back into the islands, into the people. It hasn't considered, in forestry, for example, all of the different beings in the forest, the salmon, the people, the effects on the people. And so we'll get to look at it and design how land use goes forward, trying to strike this balance between, that we do need money, there is economic needs and sustainability, but to open that space so we aren't limited by legislation or these other things that sometimes constrict creativity, for the innovation that I think the people of the islands have been starving for, to look at how do we get more out of the resources, how do we leave more of the value here, how do we invest back in the islands. And the system as it has not been designed to work that way for us, for the people who live here.
There have been years of conflict between those extractive industries, forestry in particular, and folks here in Haida Gwaii. What does that mean in future, for the future of those industries? Will there be, for example, a forestry industry, given the fact that it does produce revenue for people here, for other companies as well? Is there a future for that sort of industry, do you think, under this new agreement?
I believe there is, but I think we're all going to have to re-examine our experience of what we've all lived with and have come to know for generations. We've seen a shift from, I guess, the early days, lower tech forestry with axes and handsaws to heavy industrial extraction. And so there is a future, again, where if we can really work together here and look at Haida Gwaii landscape as a whole. We got areas, over half of the island is protected in hard protection. I mean, right now, the Haida Nation is the owner of the largest tree farm license on Haida Gwaii, so we own a forestry company. However, it's still a tree farm license, and so, that within itself comes under the constraints of the Forest Act. And I think it's also important just to, to try to create a solid foundation of conditions and certainty so people know exactly, what's allowed, what's not allowed, where they can go, how to harvest, and, again, really getting to that kind of spatial level together and, working with, the Haida Nation, but also the people of the islands who live here. There's a lot of people with great experiences and ideas, and it's like, how do you take ideas and go through that process of seeing, is there a reality there of something we can actually bring to market and implement.
How do you make that work for everybody? I mean, as part of all the people who are here, as you said, there's the Haida Nation. There are also people who have come here. The population is almost split down the middle in terms of Indigenous and non-Indigenous. And we've spoken with some people who they don't know the details of what's coming. There's not a lot of information yet. They feel a sense of uncertainty about what might be coming down the road because of a change. They might support it, but they don't know what this is going to mean for them, what it's going to mean for their livelihoods, what it's going to mean for the property that they may have lived on for generations. How do you make that work for everybody?
Communication, inclusion. I would say, I think we have solidified in our agreement with the province that people's property, their fee simple land, that is secured.
Although there's legal kind of dispute around this, which is people are trying to figure out whether the two can coexist.
I don't think there's official legal dispute. I think there's been some opinions that had come up and got attention. But if we unpack those with those people, they in fact came around and said, well, actually we do understand and recognize Aboriginal title, and the ability of the nation to consent to it is a solid legal foundation. If we look back at our history, we've always been respectful and mindful of others who live here.
Do you understand that uncertainty that people are living in right now?
I do.
Some people are living
I do, and it's not just settlers or people who aren't Haida who have that uncertainty. There's Haida people who are also asking the same questions. We've designed it in a way where I believe we can take the steps at the pace that makes sense for the islands and bring everybody along with it. One of the beautiful things about here and kind of where we're at is a lot of wealth and extraction and destruction has happened over the years, and the people who've stayed here in those municipal or settler communities, they love this place as well. And everybody wants to see the best future for the land. We all love the land. We all love this place. We all want to look after it. But obviously it's got to be led by the Haida Nation, the Haida people, and our deep history here and our experience here. I do believe that everybody will have their voice and opportunity to be part of it. And it's going to take all of us working together to actually make it happen. There isn't that many of us here, and we need everybody to be part of it and chipping in how they can on all levels of society as we kind of go down this path of reconciliation, reconciling laws, and looking at a different way of running things in the future.
What do you think this means? Reconciliation is kind of like one of those Rorschach tests, right? People see what they want to see in that word, and it means so much to different people. What is this? I don't want to say it's an experiment, but I mean it's something different, and it's a big change. What do you think that means in the context of reconciliation?
The term reconciliation, I do understand the different perspectives or opinions that come up, and I try to break it down into the levels that it exists at. At the big government-to-government level, we are looking at reconciling laws. We have our laws, they have their laws. Ours traditionally have been passed down through oral tradition. They're in our carvings, they're in our oral narratives, our histories, our stories, and they played out amongst clans and chiefs and through our potlatch system, and that still exists, and that's revitalizing in this era. The provincial government has legislation and acts and regulation, and when we have different decisions, they come into conflict. So we are truly looking at, okay, how can they work together? Where will they work together? Where will it be primarily Haida? We've seen areas like highways where provincial jurisdiction can stay, healthcare, like in the agreement we've laid out some things that will stay status quo and the areas that are priorities to focus on early on in this process. But it's an ongoing process, and I guess I would say this reconciliation happens at all levels, at an individual level where people work through it as islanders, and so it's layered in how you look at really trying to figure out how to come together and maybe take the best of both of our worlds.
For you, outside of the official role that you're in, what does this mean to you?
It's hard to separate the roles, I guess, on some level, but as a Haida person, as an uncle, it means that in this generation and time, we've been able to continue the work of those who came before us and all support each other in it to get to this point that, many people who are alive today and many people who've passed never thought they would see this day. And so to bring us there is rewarding. as an uncle and just thinking about the kids and the future generations, feel excited and, a little bit proud, I guess, but really excited that what had been a conflict for well over 100 years between the Haida Nation and the Crown can be resolved. It is important that we've been able to at least, like I said, move out from this space of conflict to, truly learning how to collaborate together.
Like if I was to talk to you in 5 or 10 years' time, what would you want this place to be? How would you see this place being different?
Well, 5 and 10 years is not that far down the road, but I think we can see a world where we are adding value to our forest resources like our ancestors had in a better way. We can see a world where there is more renewable energies that are supporting that value-added industry. We could see worlds where the world really appreciates and respects the value of the resources that we're deciding to share them. We're not forced to share them, and we design how that looks. So that concept of adding value is appreciating that a wild salmon is a rare thing in these days. They face a lot of challenges, and if we can maximize what we decide to share with the outside world, how that works, how they get to market, what the story is behind it. I can't tell you exactly what it's going to be because people are going to have to step forward, and if we can create that space and conditions for them, then I think we can unlock what our ancestors had figured out of how to find that balance of trading outside of here and maintaining a society here. But there's been a lack of, I think, creativity, and we can find the balance between, again, extraction, creative industries, intellectual property, and that is a foundation of Haida culture, that intellectual properties were valued and respected between clans, and that's what our culture is based on. So if we get back to that way of thinking in that space and led by the Haida culture, we can turn that around.
It's really great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. How for coming.
Gawguis is president of the Haida Nation.
Head north on Queen Charlotte's Highway, Yellowhead Highway west toward One Beach Road.
The next stop is Port Clements, less than an hour drive north of Skidegate.
My name's Dale Lohr. I live in Port Clements. Came here on Valentine's Day, 1987. Told my wife, I hope you like it here, because after the first day, I had found home.
Dale Lohr is a former mayor and a former logger.
You want a coffee or do you want to run straight out?
Let's have a look at your shop.
Okay, come on in.
He's a real character, and he and his wife own the general store in town.
We've got a little bit of everything in here.
Yeah, there's 5,900 products in here.
How much?
5,900.
Dale loves to talk.
This is kind of the heart and soul. It's the social center of town.
But he doesn't want to talk here.
All right, jump in this white truck here.
He takes us just outside of town.
I'll come in here for a second and see.
Into the forest.
So this is the Sika spruce.
And we talk at the foot of a giant spruce tree.
That's one of the big things my people came here for. They're strong, they're straight, and they're worth a small fortune. And
I ask him about the land title agreement and what it means for this place.
The devil's in the details. The next 14 to 18 months of negotiations are huge. Whatever isn't negotiated, then we'll go to court.
What have you heard? What are people talking about when it comes to this agreement?
Well, here's the interesting part. Not near as much as you would expect. It's more like everybody just took it in stride of knowing that this was eventually going to happen. The surprise was it happened before all the resources were taken. But aside from a couple of the rich logging companies that are local, haven't heard anything negative. And on the positive side, a real sense of satisfaction that they're acknowledging that this is our land. That's huge. It's put way more smiles on faces. I see a bigger difference in the Haida communities than in our communities. Our communities are just kind of looking at it going, well, I guess my land's going to get more valuable, right? This is the way it works, the law of supply and demand. The nice part of it is we won't have anybody else to blame. Whatever happens, it'll be us. If we can build, you're going to look at paradise. I believe we can. I believe there'll be some rough moments, just the way the world works. But we still had 20 years worth of stealing, stuff that they could have stole. What I really want to give the province credit for, and this is hard for me. I've got a 40-year hate on for those guys. They did the right thing before they had to do it. It's the first time in history that I can find where my culture gave some land back that wasn't at the point of a gun, right? That's what I find so amazing. It's a magical, magical place.
And you're confident, I guess, just finally, that agreement will preserve the magic of that place? That's what we've heard endlessly, is that this is a magical place, and you're confident that will be preserved by this agreement.
It will. It certainly gives us a better chance. Can it still get screwed up? We're humans, of course. But more and more, it's looking like we'll have the decision-making with local people. The advantage to that is we know where each other's wives and husbands work and live. If you annoy people and do stupid things, it becomes very painful for you. So that pressure is probably what keeps us safest. It's just the way it is, right?
I'm glad to be here under this tree talking to you. Thank you very much.
No problem. Now, let's just show you a cedar tree here. So this tree is about 800 years old.
Dale Lohr could talk about those trees all day. Just to be clear, they are amazing as well. Dale lives in Port Clements in Haida Gwaii. I should say that we did talk to lots of people on the islands about this deal. We couldn't find anyone who would say on the record that they are worried about the implications, but there are those looking at the agreement from afar, wondering about the precedent that it sets. Thomas Isaac is a lawyer and partner with Castles Law in Vancouver. Thomas, good morning to you.
Good morning. Nice to be with you, Matt.
It's great to have you on the program. We just heard from Gawis, who's president of the Haida Nation. He says that private property rights on Haida Gwaii will not change, and that's a sentiment that we heard shared widely on Haida Gwaii. You have written that you can't have two exclusive rights to a single piece of land. So why are you concerned?
Well, I think it's a sort of self-fulfilling statement. How can you have an exclusive right to land, which is Aboriginal title, and at the same time have an exclusive right to land for private property landowners? What I've also said is, look, absolutely, we know under existing case law that acknowledgement of Aboriginal title by agreement is possible. So to be very clear, my comments are not against the idea of government acknowledging Aboriginal title by agreement. The issue is doing it properly, doing it responsibly.
You've also said that this is a rushed job, another rushed job at reconciliation with little thought given to the long-term effects, and that it's reckless. What are the long-term effects that you're concerned about?
Well, the long-term effects is, and look, you even heard the interviewees raising the issues of there's lots of, the devil is in the detail. I believe somebody referred to. Well, it's a bit more than that. We need to understand how fee simple title can coexist with Aboriginal title. So, for example, the agreement itself, and I say this with respect, but my comments are focused on the province. It's poorly drafted. There's no carve out for democratic rights of those people living on Haida Gwaii who are not Haida. Fee simple land could have been excluded, Matt. The province chose not to exclude it. There are no public lands set aside except for core infrastructure. And then finally, all of this is set out in an agreement that Canada has not signed onto formally, and two, is not set out in a treaty. So you have the commitment in the agreement. It's section 4.4 for your listeners that say that the Haida Nation consents to and will honor fee simple interests. And the question is, well, first of all, that's by way of agreement. The Haida at some point could decide they don't want to be bound by the agreement, which, by the way, would be their right. And the bigger question is, well, is that enough to give everybody comfort about taking care of their fee simple or their private land holdings? And in some cases, this is generations of wealth built up. So from that precedent perspective, the agreement raises many more questions than provides answers. And I think you heard some of this from the folks that you interviewed about, the litigation isn't even settled yet. And so all of this, my focus has been on the province and the lack of clear guidance forward on what I consider to be very, very important questions of democratic rights, for example, as well, which I think can be dealt with. But you don't sign an agreement and then say, well, we're going to work all that out later. You can do that if they're not core values. I'm going to argue that the rights to vote in elections, your private property rights are more than just things that can be worked out later.
Just before I let you go, we just have a minute or so left. People, as I said, are watching this, not just across the country, but we heard people are arriving from around the world to examine how this is going to unfold. What are you worried about when it comes to the precedent that it might set? Just very briefly.
Well, the key point on the precedent, again, isn't whether you can acknowledge title by agreement, Matt. The issue is how you do it. And I stand by my criticism of the provincial government that has done this in such a haphazard way. Reconciliation is important business. It requires thoughtfulness. It requires prudence. And so I think that's the standard we should be holding our public governments to. Matt, if you were to ask other First Nations, would they like to have 100% of their traditional territory acknowledged by the province? I'm sure you would get them to say yes, they would, and ask them if they see any of those deals coming down the pipe. And so this is the bigger issue of this is the one-off, but what is the game plan for British Columbia as a province moving forward? And I think that if we're serious about reconciliation, we have to start addressing that question. This agreement does not address that question at all.
We'll leave it there. I'm glad to have you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thomas Isaac is a partner with Castles Law in Vancouver. All this week, we'll bring you more stories from my visit to Haida Gwaii. We'll hear how the museum there is bringing home artifacts from around the world and how that's reviving traditional practices like weaving. We'll talk about the return of the sea otters to Haida Gwaii. We'll go to the launch of a canoe. All of that coming up this week on The Current.